Imagine a world in the distant future, one where capitalist corporations are in control of everything. Advertisements littering the landscape, corporations owning their own private militaries, and the general public having their lives controlled by those very corporations. This world is one filled with cyberware and... Wait a minute. That's cyberpunk. Ah, here's the right script. Imagine a world in the distant future, one where capitalist corporations are in control of everything. Advertisements littering the landscape, corporations owning their own private militaries, and the general public having their lives controlled by those very corporations. This world is one filled with funny jokes and dark humor, all stemming from the minds of two of the three minds behind the creation of Fallout, Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky. Obsidian Entertainment got the both of them back together to make a new game. This game turned into The Outer Worlds, a funny what-if scenario of the future if capitalism went absolutely rampant. It's not just comedic, but it also involves darker themes, turning a bunch of the jokes into dark humor. First announced at the Game Awards back in 2018, it was marketed by Private Division, the third publishing label under Take-Two, as a game by the original creators of Fallout and the developers of Fallout New Vegas. They wanted everyone to know that Fallout developers were behind this title to really ramp up its potential success. Private Division funds and publishes games by smaller and indie developer studios. The same year that The Outer Worlds was announced, Microsoft also announced a batch of acquisitions they made behind the scenes, Obsidian Entertainment being one of the many in that list. So while Obsidian was now owned by Microsoft, prior commitments still led to The Outer Worlds being funded and published by Private Division instead. Going forward, it looks like future games under the Outer Worlds intellectual property will be funded and published through Microsoft. But that's all in the future. While the marketing was done by Private Division, Tim and Leonard didn't hide the fact that they considered it a AA level of game with the size and scale. Considering Private Division is a publisher for smaller games, I wasn't expecting this game to be on the same level as Fallout or Elder Scrolls. If it could scratch the itch, even at a smaller scale, it would likely be a great game. But now we live in a time where expectations for games are at an all-time high. If a video game has bugs in it, it doesn't just go up on YouTube for fun and jokes. It gets berated online and sometimes much worse. While I agree that games should launch finished and as polished as possible, I also know that game development is hard. Okay, yeah, sure. Everyone has heard that line before, but do most players actually understand the reason it's stated so often? I saw a comment somewhere on the internet years ago. I forget where, but it rings incredibly true. Quote unquote, programming is like if you change the color of your curtains and now your toilet doesn't flush. That's game development in a nutshell. See a game-breaking bug? Stamp it out. But then you don't see about the new game-breaking bug that was just accidentally created from the fix because the 100 developers in the studio never saw it before it went public. So yeah, game development is hard. Anyway, let's get back on topic. The Outer Worlds. Hi there, my name is MegaMadVlad, and since the sequel, The Outer Worlds 2, is currently in development, what better time to take a look at the first game? In this video, we're going to be taking a look at The Outer Worlds and its DLC. When you start the game, you're greeted with one of my favorite songs in the entire game. But also some of the personality you'll find with the rickety starship in the background, as if it's falling apart. Head into the game proper, and we're greeted with a cutscene of the mad scientist Phineas Wells, heading into a colony ship to find one person. In case you didn't pick up on it, that person is you. Now we find ourselves face to face with the character creator. What I like about this sequence is that there is some good immersion with it. As you pick your attributes, if you make one of them low or max them out, Phineas will make a comment on it.
An eye for detail. I bet you wrote some thorough reports. You're easily brainwashed. Glad I found you before the board did.
This is basically as he's going through the facility searching for the best person to take with him. You have 6 attributes to choose from: strength, dexterity, intelligence, perception, charm, and temperament. Each of these attributes affects a variety of different things. For example, strength will help with melee, heavy weapons, intimidation, and even carry weight, while charm helps with persuasion, lying, hacking, and even your own faction reputations. You start out at average in every category. You can go down by 1 and up by 3 on each one. Since you have 6 points to work with, this is a great spot to decide what kind of build you want. Want to talk your way out of anything? Go with charm. Want to go in guns blazing on straight up murder sprees? Maybe put some points into strength and temperament. Sometimes if you're in dialogue with someone, you can even have one of the attributes help out, like perception, allowing you to notice things easier. Next up is skills. This is where your build will really take shape, but it starts off strange. You are given 10 points every level you receive. However, when you click on any of the categories here, it'll raise every stat affected by it. So normally, with something like that, you would be able to max out quite a lot of your stats before hitting max level, right? Well, here's the interesting part. Once a stat hits 50, you can only raise it by selecting that stat by itself. Essentially, you start out as a jack of all trades as you grow, but after 50 is when you start to truly set up your build. Onward to aptitude. This section is something you can use as helping to give your character a little bit of backstory. Whether you care about it or not is up to you. Honestly, I haven't seen any bit of these popping up in dialogue in any way, so the bonuses you get from your choice are what I care about. It's not much, just something extra for more hardcore role-playing players. Appearance has some good basic templates to work with, and plenty of options to choose from with hairstyles. You don't actually end up seeing your character that much, pretty much only when you go idle and in your menu screen. After creating your favorite looking 1970s spacer, you choose your name. I perfectly remade Mr. Spacely. And with that, you see a summary, and that's that. Onward to your new adventures in the Outer Worlds. The universe of this game is funny, dark, and a place you absolutely would not want to be in.
Worse. Unemployed cannibals. You ever seen a marauder hold down a job? Or put a stake into society?
Outside of a video game, capitalism has gone absolutely rampant to the point where all corporations run everything. The government is literally called the board. The general populace all live for working and being productive. Time off is basically unheard of. If someone is unemployed, that's basically tantamount to being a terrorist, or worse than being 6 feet under. It's a horrible place where there's even a grave tax for the deceased. While that may sound absolutely terrible, it is. But it's done in such a way that is so over the top and outlandish to us. It's something that absolutely wouldn't pass as a thing in our world, so the suspension of disbelief is very much needed here. Once you attain that, just sit down, grab some food, and enjoy the ride. This is another choice-driven game, much like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. It's also fairly dialogue heavy, but it never overstays its welcome, as that's what's expected for this type of game. It's got plenty of gameplay, but your choices are what should be more prominent. This is an RPG after all. Being an RPG, there are NPCs, story, and locations aplenty up in here. A lot of the personality in this world comes from the various characters you come across. From the downtrodden worker to the snobby managers, you get to see what makes everything tick. One thing to really help learn this world is the fact that your character has been cryogenically frozen for a very long time. This was for a trip from Earth to this outer colony of the galaxy. Decades have passed during the journey, with even more time just being in orbit. Plenty of problems occurred during the trip that you can find out much later on. Going from being revived to your sleep to exploring the many locations in-game. This kind of start puts us on the same level of knowledge as our character. So when they learn something, you learn something. Not the first time this has been done in a story, but still shows it's a great use of natural storytelling. As for the locations, you can go to different ships, planets, and asteroids. They all have good variety between them. Some planets have multiple landing spots. So the main thing about this game's various locations is that they're essentially open world zones. They're nowhere near as big as, say, Skyrim, but they do add up together, giving the player a lot of room to travel, and even a variety of different locales to see. From the beautiful scenery of Terra 2, to the sulfur-filled location of Monarch, to the rocky asteroid of Scylla, you won't have a lack of different environments to look at. Not to mention they all look great. The art design was absolutely on point here. Just look at that gorgeous skybox. With the many different environments in the game, you also have a good amount of environmental storytelling as well. I wouldn't say to the extent that Bethesda has done in their games, but you can still get a feel of what happened in certain locations. You know what makes this game the way it is? The corporations. You know what corporations do? They make products and advertise everything. This is a corporation's dream world, controlling the masses in any way you can think of, and the culture of the Halcyon colony here is one that absolutely believes everything they hear from the higher-ups. Sports teams are disqualified for matches for testing negative for performance-enhancing stimuli. Everything everyone does has to be an advertisement for the corporation they work for. In this world, people are essentially owned by the corporations they work for. As horrible as that sounds, It really paints a hopeless picture for the colony without you in the picture. It's up to you to make the changes you want. To save people or become a serial killer, it's up to you. As for the gameplay, you have guns, melee weapons, your allies, and science weapons. One thing I love about this is the weapons are all from various corporations in the game. You can tell just by looking at them what company they're from. Also, it tells you right here. From handguns, long guns, and heavy weapons to one-handed and two-handed melee. You have access to quite a big variety of weapons because the different weapons that fall under each category there also have unique properties, making them different from the rest. Light pistols have a clear Spacer's Choice design to them, what with looking like they were just put together with scrap. Spacer's Choice is both the best and worst corp in the game world. Think Space Walmart. It's not the best choice, it's Spacer's Choice. The gunplay itself feels both good and tough to work with. If you go from playing a game from Bungie, like Destiny, one that has incredible gunplay in it, it'll feel lacking, of course. But the natural way of the game is that it is an RPG first mentality. Even with that, the combat still feels really good. Nothing is really clunky overall. You even have access to a special dodge skill that you can use pretty much whenever you want. Added melee to the mix, and you've got plenty of arsenal to fight with. This also makes combat feel less stale when you have more options to fight with. Things start getting more in depth with the weapons when you realize there's different types of damage as well. Plasma hurting organic beings more, electric doing more damage to mechanical enemies, N-rays doing N-ray things, and corrosive doing whatever it sounds like it does. Now, what if I told you you can add those to weapons? That's right, you can mod your weapons in this game. There's quite a lot of them too. If you ever felt a giant need to just go up and whack something in front of you, they have melee weapons for that too. From bladed weapons like sabers and scythes, to straight up hammers and batons. You have access to yet another wide variety of weapon types in here as well. And yes, you can mod these too. There are also unique weapons that you can find. They're named weapons that have different mod types in them. You can't mod them yourself, but they are good in their own rights. There's still versions of the normal weapons you can find throughout the game, and there's a lot of them to boot. They seem to all be in predetermined locations in very specific spots or even on certain enemies that you come up against. Typically named enemies or someone bigger in the story. Armor in this game works similar to that of Fallout. You have two slots, one for your helmet, the other is a bodysuit of sorts. Light, medium, and heavy armors are your selection. Heavy giving the most defense, but making sneaking harder, while light armor tends to help sneaking, while you end up taking more damage from all sources. So basically, pick whatever helps your build out the best. Weapons and armor also degrade over time. It's a mechanic in-game that not everyone is fond of. Thankfully, it's quite easy to work around. As you find weapons and armor that you don't need, you can sell them for money. But something that'll help with the degradation of your current gear is if you dismantle the items instead. That'll net you with weapon and armor parts. These are a currency you can use to fix up your current gear on the fly. If you're near a workbench, it's even easier to repair and dismantle. Now here's where things start to get wild and crazy. The science weapons. These weapons take from your science stat and have very unique effects. The gloop gun fires like a grenade launcher, so the shot arcs downward. Wherever it hits will leave an effect on the ground. Anything hit by it or runs into that leftover effect will start floating in the air, powerless to do anything. Free time to take a few pot shots, wouldn't you say? Another example of a science weapon would be the mandibular rearranger. Every time you hit someone, their head changes. I got a few laughs from it. The devs said that a few of the ideas of the science weapons came from bugs they found in the game first. So yes, bugs are legit features in the Outer Worlds. There's even straight up lore in game for pretty much all of them. Finding and unlocking them is just part of the fun before you get to use them on unsuspecting enemies. Your allies can hold 2 weapons at a time while you can hold 4. You can put whatever you want in any of the 4 slots, as well as your allies. They have their starting weapons, but if you wanted Felix to switch his grenade launcher with a pistol, go right ahead. Even give them a science weapon if you so want. I haven't ever seen them run out of ammo, so go crazy. The enemies come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You have human enemies, as well as the wildlife on the various planets to contend with. The AI combats you in a fairly smart way. Snipers will try to pick you off from afar while also taking cover. You have melee enemies that'll just run up to you as their only way of attack is, well, close quarters. even having more tanky style of enemies to fight as they try to mow you and your allies down while taking a lot of punishment themselves. It's actually pretty good depth in how they operate. The wildlife enemies are where the developers could let their imaginations run a bit more. If you love Fallout and their death claws, the Outer Worlds variant of them would be the Mantisaurs, especially the Manta Queens. While not as scary as their Deathclaw inspiration, they do take a lot of punishment before going down. Mantisaurs also cover up their weak spots if you target them. There's also a unique mechanic this game has. It's not the first time stuff similar to this has shown up in games before, but this is a fairly big mechanic to the game. Flaws. Flaws are essentially a fear or weakness you pick up from playing the game. You can decide to accept or reject them. You can have a drug addiction, or even fear a certain type of enemy. You'll receive debuffs by being too close to the enemy your character fears, or take an Adreno to stave off your addiction. Why would anyone take these flaws, you ask? Well, for two reasons. The first is it helps with role-playing for some people. The second would be it will immediately give you another perk point you can use, something that's actually quite useful. So there are a lot of perks in the game. They're all beneficial in their own ways, but it's up to you to decide which ones you pick from. Every 2 levels you go up will net you a perk point. Unlock 5 in the first tier and you unlock the second tier for the next go. Unlock 5 in the second and the third unlocks. After that, you can put whatever you want wherever you want. And the flaw system helps to give you more perk points to fill out more of the board. It's a trade-off system that works quite well in my opinion, especially with how many items you end up picking up in this game and running out of weight space. There are perks in here that allow you to raise your carry weight, so those are very helpful. Speaking of picking up items, thankfully this game does something fantastic with that mechanic, something I think should be in every other game of this nature going forward. If you ever beaten an enemy, fight a few more, and once you're done to start looting everything, that first body is just missing? You can't seem to find it. You suspect it's in the tall grass somewhere, but you just can't figure out where. Well, let me tell you that the Outer Worlds faces this issue by literally making everything you can pick up or loot glow with an outline. It's absolutely incredible. Finally, you can find everything you need, as long as you remember how many things you just killed anyway. Just the simple addition of being able to see a glowing outline of something as you get close enough is fantastic for finding things in general. A lot of times in game development, the devs will try to put lights as a more natural way of guiding the player to an objective so they don't get lost. This is the same concept here, just for the looting mechanic. And boy, will you be looting a lot in this game. It's not like Fallout 4 where everything in the game can be used, scrap included. This is more along the lines of all the products that the various corporations have made. I sure don't trust them, but they do seem to work. As for your allies, you have 6 of them. They join you on your ship as you pick them up throughout the story to join your crew. You don't even need them all. You can deny them from joining you and even kick them out if you really wanted to. But do you really not want 2 helpers following you around everywhere you go? Felix, the guy with a go-getter attitude.
Guy thinks he can push me around because he's some sky-high foreman and I'm just a back bay's dock worker. Well, former dock worker. Guess I just tendered my resignation.
Parvati, the nicest little cupcake you ever met.
Oh, Captain, I want to talk to Junlei all the time. Even about silly things, but I'm so scared.
Vicar Max, a man with a violent disposition.
You're just a parasite, living off my goodwill. Well, guess what? My goodwill's exhausted, along with my temper.
Nyoka, a hunter with a tragic past.
Soon after they left, Hayes and the others died. And to be honest, after him, I stopped trying. Because it hurt like hell to do so.
Ellie, the sawbones with heavy trust issues.
Let me get one thing straight. Jessie and I are not friends. I just owe her, okay?
And finally, Sam, the best companion to have in any and all cutscenes.
From the depths of Terra 2 to the heights of Eridanos, there's no mess that your SAM unit can't unstick, unclog, or unsully.
Also, they clean very well. Taking your companions with you gives you a number of great benefits. They can chime in on conversations you're having.
Oh, you do you? I have lost track of the number of beers you owe me for chasing raptidons off your stoop.
Have you seen Doc Wells? The guy's ancient. You take any more time and he's liable to croak.
Give you some backup when you're out and about.
Love a good fight.
Give you bonuses to skills they're attributed to. And they even have personal side quests associated with them. If you finish up their side quests, you get even more bonuses. Besides that, having them around with you helps to liven up the party a bit. Imagine being on an empty ship by yourself with nothing but your ship's artificial intelligence, Ada.
Intruders are not authorized to access the Unreliable's amenities, including the cargo hold's workbench.
For the most part, that's the gameplay. Let's hop over to the story. I'll be going into a few light spoilers in this section, just so you're aware. The story of the Outer Worlds has a few jobs that it tackles. It first tries to introduce you to the world. Secondly, it tries to tell you the main story as well as many side stories. And finally, it works everything in a choice-driven adventure. 3 major areas it tries to accomplish. In my experience with the game, I'd say it's good, but not the best. The world building is fantastic, but it also feels like the story is a bit more limited by trying to play it safe while trying to balance all 3 aspects at the same time. There's dark humor, something much appreciated, while there's also a lot of just straight up comedic moments in this dark world. What I mean is that it feels like the game leans much more heavily on its comedic aspects instead of the darker tones. This is a world filled with people that don't know what freedom is. Everyone is essentially a slave to a corporation. They don't have the ability to look for other jobs with other companies. They're considered to be property rather than living beings. Yet everyone just follows what they're told because, well, it's the only life they know. That's dark, something that can easily be leaned into for storytelling. Go too dark and you risk making something much more depressing. It's why Tim and Leonard wanted to balance that out with comedy. Don't get me wrong, the comedy is great. It just feels like they were close to the balance between the both they wanted to achieve, but didn't quite hit that level. There's also stories that seem to be going somewhere. You get a resolution for it, and they don't seem to go any further than that. As an example, on the first world of Terra 2, you're tasked with a quest to find a group of people that left their jobs to live by themselves after becoming fed up with how they were treated. They're a small faction called the Deserters. You're given a quest by the Edgewater Outpost Administrator, Reed Thompson. Once you find the Deserters, you hear their story and find out what they want. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but you have multiple choices as to how to go forward with the resolution of this quest chain here. Regardless of which route and ending you choose, Edgewater has changed from how you found it. The thing is, that's about as far as it goes. You don't see any meaningful changes while progressing the rest of the story. The only thing you see as a change is the ending slides of the game itself, where they talk about the change you implemented and how they go forward. It's not something in-game that you see outside of the initial setup. Edgewater is just frozen in place, essentially. It is like this wherever you go. Whatever quests you do, they'll push the narrative forward, but when you leave the places, they just stay the way they are. I'm a bit more forgiving on this front as it's a AA game rather than a AAA, but hopefully it's something that's addressed in the sequel a bit better. All of that aside, I do like the motivations you're given to follow the story through. The scientist who woke you up at the beginning of the game is wanted by the board. He has a bounty on his head. One of the things I love about choice-driven games is that you get to choose how you go forward in the game. With knowledge like this, you could follow Phineas on the path he laid out for you, or you could sell his information to the board, thus unlocking a new ending to the game later. You get to choose how you go forward. Speaking of your character knowing things that ends up changing outcomes in the story, you'd honestly be surprised how often something like this comes up as a possibility. If you go searching through certain locations tied to your quest, like say looking at information on computers, there's a chance that that information you saw there will be a dialogue option in the future of that quest. It's knowledge that your character just found out about, and it adds that in as something to talk about. Maybe another bargaining chip, or maybe something that can help you get around a dialogue skill check that you lack the level of. It's great when games take advantage of this, as it makes the already dynamic dialogue system even more dynamic. It rewards players for searching around and learning more about the world. While of course you need a fair amount of suspension of disbelief for this game, after all, it's in space and the culture is far and away from anything we would tolerate in real life. But I can still say that the story was good overall. From the start of the game all the way to whichever ending you choose, the story is paced well enough that it feels more natural. Obvious plot-driving contrivances aside. The side quest storylines all have their fun with them as well, like an extremely overprotective mother wanting her 42-year-old son back home.
Oh, Captain, you did it! My little boy is back, safe and sound! Tell the captain how grateful we are, Tuk Tuk.
Mama, I told you that I'm not staying. I just came back to talk to you about why I left. Then I'm going back to Amber Heights.
Or even becoming a movie star.
Kid, you got presence. Natural magnetism, know what I mean? Tell you what, you're gonna like it a whole lot more once we start talking bits. Listen, you got an agent? Some kind of representation? Fresh, natural talent. I know it when I see it. Listen, you got a real special quality, raw energy. I see you in pictures, kid.
These side quests have their own comedic personalities that fit the world the devs made. Even some of the side quests have multiple endings. Let's talk about that movie star quest. You get hired to show up, say a few lines, and get paid. The goal is to promote the Joch Company. You can act your way through like you normally would in real life, then you'd be told you weren't quite good enough. However, if your dialogue turns into you actually gutting down the other actors, you become the star of the show, only to be told that you need to wait for a while so all the paperwork can get in order.
Hey, listen, I appreciate what you tried there. We've got to review your footage before we make a final decision, though. Look, sometimes you just gotta wait for your break, you know? I knew you had chops, but that was something else. You found the energy in the scene and ran with it. That was visceral. Hey, time is bits, right? It'll take a few months to get your contract set up, but it'll be worth it. Here's your fee for today, but there's more to come.
The point being that pretty much every quest has at least a little bit of choices that you can make to turn that into your own story. The thing about this game is it's an RPG. Not only is the story good enough on its own, but it definitely helps to fill out the criteria of being a full-on RPG by making it your story in the circumstances of your choosing. It's a great part of the game, and the most important part for the devs to get right, as it's the main selling point. With all of that said and done, that's the base game in a nutshell. Let's talk about the two DLC, Peril on Gorgon and Murder on Eridanos. Alright, let's go in order of release. Peril on Gorgon was first, so Peril on Gorgon it is. So Peril on Gorgon was directed by Carrie Patel, while Tim and Leonard went on to their next project, likely to be the sequel of the game as they had ideas for it already. That said, remember when I brought up how the story of the base game was a mix of comedy and dark tones, leaning more towards the comedy? Well, you could look at Gorgon as leaning much more heavily towards the dark spectrum. And honestly, because of that change in tone, it feels exactly like I first expected the game to be like when it was announced to be headed up by two of the Fallout creators. In other words, I loved Peril on Gorgon. Everything about this DLC is what I hoped the game would be. Mystery, tough enemies, intrigue, a new location, very dark tones, and an incredible outdoors theme. It has it all, and I just wish it was longer. It has a sort of noir style of story to it, where you receive a package, open the package, find out it's an audio recording, and listen to it with the rest of your crew. I accidentally started this before getting Sam in the crew, so I missed hearing his cleaning words of wisdom. Regardless, here's the kicker. The message came with a hand. Like a legit severed hand still holding onto the recorder. If that doesn't catch your attention at first, maybe the message will. Let's listen to it.
Hawthorne, if you're getting this, something's happened to me. Got mixed up in some shady business on Gorgon. Should have known better. But I landed on something big. And now this job's an itch I can't stop scratching. There's a whole research compound left to the Sprats. I think I'm close to figuring out why. But something dangerous is closer to me. Got the job through one Minnie Ambrose. Top runger who just came into some money, was offering a hefty bid card for qualified help. Trust me, her money's good. Talk to Minnie. Take the job. If I ain't gonna live to see the payday, might as well be you. Consider us even, old pal.
Well, that fellow certainly seemed trustworthy.
I've gotten jobs from some unusual sources, but this is a first. Congratulations, Captain.
I don't mean to sound prim, Captain, but there's gotta be a better way to ask someone to do you a favor.
I just want to say, we gotta take this job. This is the closest I ever been to starring in a serial drama. Only thing we're missing is a couple of cameras and a soundtrack.
At least this won't be boring.
If that doesn't hook you, I have no idea what will. One thing I will say is that Gorgon will answer a very big question that you never had. The gameplay is basically the same as it was before, just with some stronger weapons and new science weapons to get. You still have packs of enemies, locations to explore, people to talk to, and so on. The only difference being it's a new location, and the enemies were experimented on, thus giving them new abilities, but functionally, nothing super different from what you've experienced before. Outside of these super fast marauders, of course. Gorgon is so good that I can't recommend it enough, so I really don't want to accidentally spoil anything here. If you played the base game, do yourself a huge favor and play this DLC. You won't regret it. Now to the second and final DLC, Murder on Eridanos. I couldn't actually find out who directed this one, but Eridanos feels like a mix between the base game and Gorgon for its tone. It's dark, humorous, and full of mystery. You, the player, are hired on as an inspector to investigate a murder. Let's take a look at the really well done introductory cutscene.
It was the law-forsaken parasites. I had become obsessed. My quest to stop them. To avenge my partner, Philip. And my ex-partner, Bernice. And Lieutenant Jurgen. And those two informants had brought me to Rizzo's distillery. But it wasn't just the triple distilled deliciousness of Rizzo's Spectrum brand vodka that I found there. It was death. I made sure the Brain Eaters paid the price. But at what cost to me? It's you.
This is the Halcyon News Network with breaking news. Halcyon Helen has been murdered. Administrator Ludovico of Rizzo's refused to answer the big question on everyone's mind. Who will Spectrum Vodka's next spokesperson be? Claiming that a special investigation must be concluded first.
They give another hook. While in my opinion, not quite as hooky as Gorgon's was, it was still another great way to get interest into this storyline. One thing I love about this DLC is it makes complete fun of the trope where the player doesn't know who the killer is, but they'll see and hear instances where another character sees the killer, but doesn't give anything away. What I mean is, every time you see a cutscene where a character sees the villain in question, they'll say, "It's you," right before being killed. Or maybe it's a person that will literally say, "Sir" and or "Madam."
Excuse me, sir or madam. I require your participation in my nightly security report.
Once again, you have more enemies, great story, a new location, and new science weapons. Maybe there's a reason they made 2 DLC stories based around mysteries. Overall, it's another DLC that fits perfectly into the setting of the Outer Worlds. Nothing feels out of place with how crazy of a story this universe has. While Murder on Eridanos is great, it doesn't quite hit the same highs as its predecessor, Peril on Gorgon. But if you did play the base game and Gorgon, you might as well top off the experience with Eridanos too. Both DLCs are great in how they add to the game rather than take away from it. I can absolutely recommend both of them to anyone looking to hop into this world before the sequel releases. All in all, The Outer Worlds is a great time. It might not have some of that ambition in it that you'd see in AAA titles like Fallout, but that doesn't mean you should skip this because of it. One thing The Outer Worlds doesn't have that I wish it did is random encounters. Can you imagine making one of these corporations angry enough to send hit squads after you? Your reputation gets so low, their own locations not only shoot you on sight, but you'd see squads of them sometimes in the wilderness hunting you down. It's something that would absolutely fit how the corporations are in many ways. It would absolutely be in character for them to do something like that. Something like this would end up making the world feel bigger and much more lived in. It would show off your choices and consequences in a much bigger light, bringing them to the forefront even. The Outer Worlds is a smaller budget game overall, so I understand why something like this wasn't implemented in the game, but the potential for something like this to exist in its AAA sequel would make the game bigger. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they end up giving us in the future of this new IP. After having experienced the endings, there's definitely hints as to where we could go from here. Only time will tell on that front though. We just need to give the developers the time they need. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I have plenty more that I've made, like how I'm slowly going through all the mainline Elder Scrolls games. I have a journey that I'm taking on through the world of Guild Wars 2, or even if you're a fan of the stealth action genre like Metal Gear Solid, there's going to be plenty more videos on the way. Hope you all have a great day. Adios.